Hi there, my name is Jessica Crow. I'm the founder of Apogee and I'm the host of Change Leader Insights. And I'm so excited because today I have here with me Traci Coven. Hello, Traci. Traci
Hello.
is the Director of Clinical Change Management and Deployment at DaVita, and she's also the CEO and founder of the Inner Game of Performance, which is an athlete coaching mindset company. And I've known Traci for several years. I'm just really happy to have her on the show. Traci, thank you so much for joining me. I know we've known each other for quite some time, but for listeners and viewers, can you tell us a little bit about your your background and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. So glad to be here. Really excited to be with you today. And so I was an athlete in high school and faced some adversity and challenges. And to be honest with you, I didn't adapt well to the changes that I needed to. Ironically, in 2013, I started working at DaVita Healthcare and got certified in change management. And since then have really led several large, complex, multi-million dollar change initiatives across the village for DaVita.
Yeah. And so that you've been in change management since then, and then the inner game of performance, that is your kind of your passion, right? Of helping athletes because of what you experienced back when you were in high school. We'll get to that. Before we talk about the inner game of performance, let's talk a little bit about DaVita and your role as clinical change management and some of the work you do there and how change management is structured in the organization, because a lot of the people who are listening to this conversation or will be watching it, they are change management leaders. They are change leaders. They may have a different role in the organization, but change management is top of mind. So it's really, it'd be really interesting to hear about how you do the job that you do at DaVita and maybe how things are structured within the organization.
Yeah, that sounds great. So I again focus on large, complex clinical initiatives. And I really have standardized a process that has been successful over the last 13 years to really not only achieve implementation goals, so the adoption and utilization goals, but also making things stick so that we have long-term clinical outcomes. I will say that one of the biggest challenges I've seen in the clinical setting really is inconsistency in how change is introduced. When there is a lack of standardization. So that's why I'm so passionate about standardization. And once you find something that works, really not trying to reinvent the wheel, but just really keeping things standardized. And so, standardization in how we develop pilots and then also how we roll out initiatives on a large scale. Really when things aren't standardized, the end user gets confused, there's disengagement and frankly, poor results.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I think the standardization helps people know what to expect when change is coming. And when you're doing it at a scale like you are, because DaVita is a big organization, there's hundreds of thousands of employees, which are also called teammates, dialysis centers across the globe and obviously in the United States. And when it comes to clinical care and clinical outcomes, that consistency, that approach, obviously every patient needs their own unique care plan. At the same time, how you support the caregivers, the clinical teammates in doing what they do, having that standard expectation is really valuable. You actually put together you kind of took this a little bit further with what you do in change management with developing a standard way to test changes, to pilot changes. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I had seen different situations where different teams were piloting changes or clinical initiatives. And to be honest, they weren't set up with the foundational elements to help set them up for success. And so what really was happening is that we were, rolling out pilots with different processes. This meant the frontline staff was being asked to adapt without clarity and consistency. The frontline teammates in the facilities weren't being brought into the feedback loop. And so there was a lot of inconsistency. And really, the first thing was that I was asked to help really standardize the general release process. And so scaling. But what I noticed is that we needed to step back a little bit and really figure out the standardized pilot process to set pilots up for success prior to even getting to scale, because a lot of times the pilots weren't set up with success metrics, the right feedback loop, the right leadership or stakeholder engagement, sponsorship planning. And so then when they would want to scale, obviously going to a general release wasn't going to be successful because they hadn't piloted effectively and efficiently. And so what I did is I went through a process to set up a standardized pilot approach for clinical initiatives. So anything that impacts clinical care or clinical outcomes goes through a very rigorous approach to ensure the pilot is set up. And what that does, set it up for success. What that does is help mitigate wasted resources. Obviously, time and resources equal money. So that way, when the pilot is done, we can prove whether it was successful or not, to get a clear, informed decision about moving to a general release.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think this is an important message for people to hear, whether they're in healthcare or not in healthcare. You can have these really great solutions, you can have these really great ideas, but how you implement them can have an impact on the outcome of that initiative, right? Whatever it is.
Yes.
you know, the way you were describing it, having sponsorship, making sure people understand kind of what's coming when, and that standard approach early on. I think this is something that even, like I said, outside of the healthcare setting, that starting small and scaling smart is a great strategy for any type of change you're trying to introduce, because then you get an opportunity to get that critical feedback. Now, of course, change management isn't going to ever inform the clinical, protocol or policy, but how it gets rolled out, absolutely. And again, like I said, if you have a really great solution, a really great initiative, but you don't have the right change management in place or any change management, then unfortunately it could have an impact on the overall effectiveness of what you're trying to do. So I think that's a really, really valuable message for anybody in any industry to hear. How do you, so, and just recognizing too how large DaVita is and how many things are going on at any given time, how do you and the rest of the team, the rest of the organization, navigate continual change? I mean, you've got competing priorities, you've got different stakeholders on different teams, there's a lot going on. What have you seen work well in your organization that you would recommend to other, change management professionals or leaders in organizations from a change management perspective?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. It's a really great question. And something that I'm very, very passionate about is the leadership alignment, is what I like to call it. So it's not necessarily the stakeholder engagement, but it's really at each level that, depending on what the change is, obviously getting C-level alignment, getting OCMO, so Office of the Chief Medical Officer, because it is healthcare, getting OCMO alignment, getting senior VP alignment, senior director alignment. And what I've found is that a lot of people, I think, at least in the environment that I navigate, is they think, oh my gosh, this is a lot of steps. This is so much. But the thing is, if we navigate change and manage change on the front end effectively, then it's going to be smoother on the back end, right? And so that's what I try to share with teammates at DaVita is just, yes, I know that this feels like a lot of steps, but it really is effective, because while we're getting their alignment, we're also able to get their feedback, and we can pivot and shift as we need to, really live, right? Before we want to roll out. Otherwise, we get to the point where we want to roll out a change and we don't have leadership alignment at all the right levels. Right. And then there's kind of chaos, and it's like navigating the different personalities and that kind of thing. And so it's just so important to take the time up front to gain leadership alignment and really be open to listening to their feedback and kind of meeting in the middle before you get to the point of wanting to roll it out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that resonates. And I was gonna say too, I've seen this. I mean, having worked at DaVita myself and worked with
Mhm.
many clients since then, this is a very common challenge in organizations is it's that upfront stakeholder leadership alignment piece. And I think there's, in most of the clients that I've worked with, this often doesn't happen because there's a desire to move. And it's not, with any malicious intent. It's let's
Mhm.
move quickly, we've got something good, like let's roll it out. And then even I would say not only leadership alignment but getting that end user feedback that often gets skipped up front because there's this thought that it could slow down the process. But to your point, if you don't do all that up front, then that once you roll out, it can get, or you may never get to that point of rollout because there's not that cohesion, there's not that understanding, there's not that buy-in that has to happen. And that ends up, that being the reason why changes get delayed, why they don't ever happen, or why they don't stick, or people make up their own workarounds to the change. So there's just a lot that can happen if everyone is rowing in slightly different directions. And again, common challenge.
Yes. So just to kind of round that out, I know, one again major transformation and just really where I wanted to standardize at DaVita was that we
Hmm.
saw in that stakeholder engagement. And before, again, leadership felt like they weren't involved. Teammates in the facilities felt like pilots, especially, were kind of done to them. And now they're brought
Mm-hmm.
in early, like you said, from the leadership level, getting their feedback. Their feedback is built into the process, and so they feel like they're they're part of the development.
Yeah.
There's clear mechanism to evaluate what's working and what's not, and that shift alone has really boosted adoption rates and trust,
Yeah.
amongst the clinical team, because leaders now trust that, the team that I help lead, and that we're going to go to them for feedback. Field teammates that are, chosen to participate in these pilots know that we
Hmm.
are going to get their feedback and evaluate it. And so it
And
builds
do
trust as
something with
well.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, congratulations with that. That's certainly
Thank
a
you.
way to, to your point, build trust, but also get the outcomes, the adoption that's necessary for the changes to actually be successful too. That's great. Well, so then, one of the things that I do appreciate about DaVita too is the focus on change management. There's your team, there's several teams. There seems to be general, understanding and value for change management. Can you talk about, just to give perspective, like change management is kind of a big deal at DaVita, right? In terms of the number of people that are committed to this practice. Can you tell us a little bit about what the structure internally looks like?
Yeah, sure. So we do have what's called Team Runway. It is a centralized change management and deployment team that really is kind of the heart and core, I guess, of change management and at DaVita. And then there are several teams within DaVita that have somebody that also lead change, such as myself, and kind of
Mhm.
liaise between. So for my instance, I liaise between the clinical teams and Team Runway.
Got
And
it.
so my specialty specifically is clinical initiatives. There are teams that, are more operational based or more experience. Creating a special place is one of DaVita's
Mhm.
things. And so teams that really focus on making DaVita a very special place. And so there's typically somebody on each of those teams that help liaise between that team and Team Runway, who is the centralized deployment and change management team that I actually helped to develop and create the methodology when
Yeah.
that team was first kind of developed. And then I was asked to move back over to clinical to kind of focus on clinical, but still partner very closely with Team Runway.
Yeah, that's so cool. And that, that's a centralized and a decentralized. So for people that are listening and tuning in, recognizing that there's space for both within organizations
Mhm.
and just how important change management is, especially at DaVita. And perhaps even in the healthcare setting, just having all of those different levers you can pull to set your clinicians and teammates and patients up for success. So that's really cool. Let's talk a little bit, kind of pivoting with your change management background, and now you've got this thing that you're working on. I don't want to say it's your passion project because it's your company, but let's talk about the inner game of performance. How are you leveraging your understanding of human behavior and change to support athletes who need mindset coaching?
Yeah, thanks. So this definitely is my passion. Inner game performance and change management may sound like they kind of live in different worlds, but really they're deeply linked. And so let me just back up really quickly and share
Yeah.
what I do for at Inner Game Performance is that I'm an athlete mindset coach, and I help
Uh-huh.
athletes take their game to the next level by kind of developing that champion mindset inside out, which is a crucial component of, performance. But really where I focus, like you mentioned, Jess, is on rapid resilience and
Mm,
goal setting. And so that's where I tie in my change management experience,
mhm,
because of the fact that athletes have to be able to adapt quickly, right? So whether the person's on the field or in a clinical unit,
mhm.
performance under pressure often comes down to their inner game, right? Our
Yeah.
mindset, our adaptability, and the ability to respond to change with clarity and confidence. And so
Mhm.
I've really found that is the key. Not only I had to identify like where I went wrong as a high school athlete, why didn't I play at the next level? What, I couldn't adapt to change. And then I
Mhm.
started seeing it. All three of my kids are athletes, but my two high schoolers are elite athletes now. And, I started seeing some of that in them. And so that's
Yeah.
really where this passion came from to create inner game performance.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's such an important conversation to have too, especially with our kids at that level in high school. I've got a son that's still in middle school, but some of his peers on his soccer team are going into high school, and the pressure and the conversations that are happening even now. And so I see a lot of value in what you're describing, because mindset is absolutely important, but then understanding how to leverage those core concepts of change management from a goal setting perspective, from developing resilience, from adaptability, those aren't necessarily things that kids are learning in high school or even middle school. So I love that you're taking on the challenge of helping our young people develop new skills and ways of thinking that can really, I can see this helping them not only from a sports perspective, but also just life perspective, right? Like they'll
Mhm.
gain some skills through your coaching that they could certainly use in, other settings. So that's really cool. Anything else that you'd like to share, Tracy, about just change management? Any tips for leaders and organizations, or for youth who are going through change related to their sports, maybe dreams in high school?
Yeah, I think just a couple things. So one is, when we bring structure to change management, we don't just improve outcomes, but we elevate the experience for everyone, right? So whether it's in a corporate setting or like you said, athletes, it's whether it's healthcare or sports, burnout is a real thing. In corporate setting, turnover is a risk. And that structure is more than a strategy. It really is essential for sustainability, whether
Mhm.
again, we're in the corporate setting or on a field. And so I think then just the last thing I'd want to say is just that, again, talking about sustainability, athletes need the same thing when they're asked to shift roles on
Mm.
their team or to learn a new play, to adapt to new coaching styles, maybe going from junior high or middle school into high school,
Mhm.
it is a change. And so they need to be able to adapt with a clear process. And
Yeah.
if they don't have a process and understand that methodology or kind of have a strategy, I guess, to
Mhm.
walk themselves through that, it can create resistance and a lot of
Mm.
stress for young athletes, which then turns into underperformance. And so I think really that's why the inner game performance matters. It's about building that mental framework emotional resilience to navigate change, uncertainty, and pressure.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds, I feel like, as you know, as you're describing that, I'm like, my son, I need to be thinking about this for him because he's going through that right now. So very cool. Traci, I'm so glad we got a chance to talk today and connect again. Thank you for sharing your story about both how change happens at DaVita and also the inner game of performance, or the inner game performance, I think is what you were calling it.
Yes.
But this is great. I appreciate your time today. And I have no doubt that people who are tuning in will have been glad to have listened to this episode as well. So thanks again for your time.
Thank you so much, Jess. I really am grateful for this opportunity.
Welcome. All right. Talk soon.